I've never seen a customer base like Nvidia's where they want to so badly dump Nvidia and their 70% margins, but they're just kind of locked in. And there's been a lot of discussion about this. Jim Keller's been like smack talking a little bit on X. He says Kuda is not a moat, it's a swamp. X86 was a swamp too, and we overcame it. So it definitely seems like there's a lot of energy, a lot of talent, a lot of capital being put into, you know, challenging the $1 trillion elephant in the room, Nvidia. And their lead is only going to be, I think, eroded over time as more attention gets put into this field. But how quickly, I'm not sure. They are great competitors. So we'll have to see what happens. But I do think that we will have a greater variety of chips from different companies over time.
Yeah, I think I agree with this notion that CUDA is a swamp for what it's worth. The other way to look at this is as language models get really good at adapting programming languages from one format to another and really refining how you write the languages, you can no longer claim programming languages as a moat. So CUDA as a moat, I don't buy it for that reason, in addition to many other reasons. Other part is when you come to hardware specialty, the key thing about the hardware specialty is if you go back to like the warehouse analogy we've used in the past, it's like you have like these bouncers with like counters standing in front of each of the rooms, and different amounts of each of the different kinds of rooms is being used. So let's say there's 10 flavors of rooms and people go to different genres of music and they're going in and out. Until you deploy these hardware ASICs into production and you put these bouncers out there to count how much traffic is going to each of these rooms, you don't really have a good sense of how much each of them is, like what the popularity of each of them is. So if the first room is 10 times as popular as the other 9, you want to allocate 10 times as many of those rooms on your hardware. That's how each iterative generation is usually getting better and better, because they can just look at the ratios of the popularity and they can reallocate the space on the chips properly. They can even move them closer to each other to like effectively shrink the paths that these music goers in this analogy are going to travel. So the big advantage, in my opinion, is whoever has the hardware lead with the most usage early on will continue to maintain that lead as long as they don't fumble.
We're going to get a question from Tesla Yoda, and then I'm going to force you guys to a punchline. Yoda, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys are also looking at TSMC. They make obviously the chip for Nvidia, AMD, the Apple Silicon, etc.
I think TSMC is the only company with a moat at this time because they have managed to keep a really good trade secret of how they have 3 to 5 nanometers of precision in their chipset design. And the closest competitor is Intel. And I think they're targeting 5 to 7. And they still don't have that because they actually are closer to 12 to 14 right now. So it's like not even close in terms of competition. If folks want to like pressure TSMC, they couldn't. But what's strange is TSMC is keeping their prices pretty low given the moat that they have. So I think there's non-capitalistic reasons why that's happening.
Yeah, I think their margins is around just above 50%, usually 50 to 55 is their margins. And Intel is also their customer actually, especially at the advanced nodes. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Meta, NVIDIA, buy, hold, or sell?
Me personally, I would sell.
Okay, Omar?
Hold.
Machine or Yoda? If you guys want to opine, you may, on NVIDIA, buy, hold, or sell.
I think it's a hold.
NVIDIA would be buy for me because of the impending, I think the split. Although again, TSM has I think a multiple of 25 right now, so feels like it's more attractive.
Okay, so we have on NVIDIA, we have one buy from Yoda, one sell from Meta, and 2 holds from Omar and Machine. So let's start with Meta. So Yoda said his reason for a buy is impending split. So he's, maybe forecasting a rush into the stock leading into a stock split. Meta, what's your, executive summary for your why it's a sell?
If we're looking at a 1 year plus Horizon, I don't think their margins will sustain. And then based on their current pricing, I don't think the market's expecting that.
Omar, do you think Nvidia's margins will sustain in the next year or two?
To be honest, I have no clue, but I think they probably will, for the most part, hold up.
And I think Machine thinks so too. He said in earlier spaces that orders and demand for the H100s should sustain for the next year or two, right, Machine?
Yeah, I think so. But even if they don't, I guess where my head is that I think even if margins decrease, the amount that they would decrease would be compensated by the increase in revenue because they're growing revenue still. That overall operating income would still be flat, if not still going up a bit. And if you look at their valuation on their last quarter, then they're not really that super highly valued if that was just extrapolated out for 4 quarters. That's why I'm hold though, because I'm not sure that the margins are going to sustain and then therefore be a buy. I'm going to wait and see what I read on and listen to the next earnings and see where things are then to kind of update my thoughts.
So I've been listening to a lot of talk on Nvidia going into this earnings release this week. It is a hot stock. And I think the market consensus is what Machine just said, which is even if their margins don't sustain, their top line is going to grow, so operating income might grow or stay stable, etc. The question is, does that justify 100 PE? And yes, the historical PE, etc. If you annualize last quarter, etc., it might be lower, but still, it's 100 PE.
But it's a lot lower. It's like 40 or under.
Do you think 40 is reasonable for a stagnant operating income?
I don't know. Why don't you ask Tesla if a 60 is reasonable?
Yeah, but Tesla has obviously, as you know, megapacks, factories ramping on 2 continents. We have Optimus project that's going to change labor as we know it. We have robotaxis on the horizon, Cybertruck production ramping, and only Elon knows what else. What does Nvidia have beyond H100s?
No, I agree. There is a much bigger long-term potential with Tesla over many years in the future. In the nearer term, for the next year or two, those things, even Cybertruck or Megapacks, aren't going to fundamentally change their operating margins in revenue so much where they can really be super highly valued. So it's really going to come down to perceptions of FSD and Optimus changing their valuation. So I mean, I agree with that. Nvidia has more limited scope, and so it's going to be more sensitive to the market reaction to margins, current margins on their H100s and whatnot. And if those go down, the stock will suffer more likely than Tesla would when their margins went down.
The stock's got a trailing PE of 95, but the forward PE is 35. And if they keep growing, it's going to continue to look even cheaper. So, you know, I, you know, of course they've got this huge lead. It's probably only going to erode over time. I would be very shocked to see them actually take more share of the market over time. Everybody wants to get away from them. They hate that they're spending, 70% margins for Nvidia on these products. But you'd look at this business, they're going to sell 2 million of these things in the next year, these DGX H100s. They cost $40,000. So this thing costs almost as much as a Tesla. They're going to sell as many of them as Tesla sells. And instead of the margin being 16%, it's 70%, right? I mean, that's a really great business. Sure, people may be trying to get away, but the big customers are Google Cloud, Amazon AWS, and Microsoft Azure. These are big ships. They don't just change, they don't just cancel their Netflix subscription, cancel their Nvidia because, they got too drunk last night and spent too much money. These are like, budgets that they've set in advance. They got customers who are depending on them to do this capital outlay. They're going to buy it, right? Any sort of change in the market is going to be at least at a 3 to 5 year time horizon, really. There's a lot of inertia here. And you know what? People are just like, the stock just has momentum. When people just see it shooting up, you know how people get. Things can get a little irrational, right? So whatever a rational investor thinks, it can go a little bit higher than that. Like if you had told me, and I was super bullish about Tesla in 2018, what's the highest you think the market cap could go? I wouldn't have suggested $1 trillion, but it went well over $1 trillion. So, things can get a little bit nutty. People just see everyone else making money. They want to pile in. That's not necessarily the best time to jump in when it's shooting up. You can get burned. Eventually, there's going to be a correction. But you know, would I tell someone to sell it? It's easy to look at it and say, oh my God, it's overvalued, sell it. But people told me that when it was like 200, 300, 400. And I almost listened to them, but I'm glad I didn't because, it's just going up. And when you're riding a rocket ship, don't let go in the market. There will be a moment when it sort of corrects, and then maybe I'll, trim my position a little bit. But I'm not sure when that day will be. It could be this week with earnings. It could be next quarter. It could be in 4 quarters. Who knows?
Two good replies in X. So if you want to participate in the discussion, you may either request to speak or you can leave a reply either on X or on YouTube live chat. The link to which is at the top of your screens. YouTube live hours help me get to watch hours requirement. First good reply. I missed the key player in Nvidia. A perfect squirrel says Nvidia has Pelosi. So that's a really good point. And then the second good reply, Blue Skies 123 says, after H100s, NVIDIA has HGX H200. NVIDIA is introducing a new top-of-the-line chip for AI work, the HGX H200. The new GPU upgrades the wildly in-demand H100 with 1.4 times more memory bandwidth and 1.8 times more memory capacity, improving its ability to handle intensive generative AI work. Has anyone ever seen a table that compares NVIDIA's current product, future product, versus what others have said they're going to put out in the next couple of years? I would be interested in that table. If you have, please reply to the space with that table.
I mean, it's weird. It's almost not really about that. Like, you could get an AMD GPU and it can kind of do the same thing. But NVIDIA is just sort of the gold standard. They've been doing this for years, right? You saw them donate the first DGX computer to OpenAI back in 2016. They've just been investing in this in a long time, whereas others are now just sort of looking at it and going, "Oh shit, this is actually a really important market." So, you know, there's a lot of chips out there with pretty similar capabilities, but it's everything. It's the hardware, it's the software, it's the APIs, right? A lot of people, I mean, GPU programming is kind of esoteric. People know how to program a CPU, but programming a GPU, people are kind of like, huh? Like most people do not know how to write CUDA code. CUDA is like this very sort of esoteric thing. You're mostly just relying on a CUDA module that somebody wrote, right? And your average sort of GPU user, if you're just running some training job in PyTorch or something like that, you probably don't know anything about CUDA or the implementation details of the kernel. You just know that, okay, this is my setup and it works with the NVIDIA GPU. So it's a really interesting situation.
Yoda and the machine.
Yeah, the other reason for uh, a buy for me is, yeah, Jensen. He is a master storyteller. I'm all in on Tesla, of course. So, but that's actually one difference between sort of him and Elon. He may be lesser of an engineer, and maybe by far, but from a investor relations perspective, and storytelling perspective, he's probably stronger. And so, yeah, that's definitely not something to underestimate as well.
Thank you. Jensen founded NVIDIA, is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And it should be worth noting that it's about the ecosystem. So Jensen has relationship with the founders, Morris Chan of TSMC, and it is the grip hold on that capacity on TSMC side, as well as on the material supply side with Japanese raw material suppliers, and then uh, that actually creates the moat. It's not pure just sort of the science or the engineering side. There's a whole supply chain ecosystem, obviously, and so that is very difficult for even the Intels of the world to break. A good case in point is China has a lot of chip design firms that are trying to replicate what TSMC has done, but has failed because they don't have the relationships with the supply chain. So for those reasons, why again, NVIDIA would be very, very difficult to replicate. Have you guys noticed they're all Taiwanese? So Jensen, AMD, the CEO is also Taiwanese. TSMC, of course. So there's definitely an ecosystem there.
Interesting point. Thank you very much, Yoda. That's very valuable. I mean, Yoda made a really good point. Why NVIDIA enjoys such a amazing ecosystem in the supply chain. It's not just about the engineering, but the supply chain ecosystem. So it would make it even harder for AMD or others to catch up to NVIDIA. So then, Yoda, I guess the question, a natural question for you is then why are you 100% invested in Tesla if you're so impressed by Jensen and you believe that the stock is undervalued and they will continue to dominate?
Yeah, I should say that I think I'm about 95% on Tesla in the portfolio. I've been divesting Apple, which was a part of the portfolio, into TSMC. And I was holding Nvidia, but unfortunately that was prior to I had a position that I sold prior to ChatGPT moment in late 2022. And so for me right now it's about shifting Apple into TSM and TSMC and Nvidia. But again, it's just that the NVIDIA currently has a higher value, higher P ratio, post 2022 versus TSM, and so TSM is sort of I guess a more of a hedge bet because every AI chip has to go through them in terms of the advanced node AI chips. But of course, I would love to have held on to more NVIDIA.
Yoda, what do you expect from Wednesday from NVIDIA's earnings?
I think Jensen is gonna say that the market is exploded and they cannot see the end of demand. Maybe very similar to what Elon talks about, kind of the next gen vehicle demand that it's essentially unlimited. I think a figure that AMD has been thrown out there is it's about a $400 billion TAM. But for the most part, no single company can address that in the short term because it's supply capacity constraint. So it's really a moot point. It's really for them to share that outlook that basically demand is essentially unlimited in the short term. And he always talks about how essentially the industry is trying to convert to accelerated computing, and so all the data centers are converting to accelerated computing. Yeah, so it's really supply and manufacturing capacity constraint would be the story, I think.
Gotcha, thank you. The AI investor says, fun fact, NVIDIA is projected to sell 2 million H100s in 2024, close to the number of cars that Tesla would sell in the same year. NVIDIA sells H100 for $30,000 to $40,000 with gross profit on each of $21,000 to $28,000. Tesla sells cars for $46,000 with a gross profit of $9,000. The crazy part about NVIDIA gross margin, NVIDIA doesn't even manufacture the chip. Another crazy part, there's no limit to the demand of H100s, while demand for cars is limited. Do you agree with the statement that there's no limit to the demand of training chips?
Well, of course not. There's a limit to everything.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Yoda, what do you think? Do you think there's a limit to training chips, and that's specifically for H100s? And if there is, like Omar says, and I think so too, how far is that?
Yeah, I think in a short term there's no limit again, just more from a capacity of manufacturing perspective. But in terms of the IP, eventually these things do get copied because people move around companies. And again, I don't want to not mention this part, which is TSMC, when they work with their customers, they actually help them with solutioning. And so some of this IP is actually residing with TSMC. And so how they intentionally or unintentionally or through osmosis share that with AMD, and other companies, of course, they don't do that explicitly, but how those kind of knowledge gets shared eventually, I think is a risk. The only thing you could trust is that NVIDIA, I believe, is one of those companies, much like Tesla, that is always innovating and views that innovation is ultimately, the real moat, not patents, etc. So I do think that NVIDIA, as they have with all the various platforms that they've done throughout the last couple of decades, they'll continue to do that under Jensen's leadership.
I'm just some additional thoughts on the Nvidia and Tesla comparison. So it is definitely really striking today. But you think about a situation that could arise in the next couple of years where the average car in the fleet can generate, let's say, $300,000 in gross profit over its lifetime. And that's split, 50-50 between the fleet owner and the Tesla company. The equation could look very different. Whereas when you look at compute, you've never in the history of the microprocessor seen a situation where a chip just stays really expensive. It's always gotten to the point where you get more transistors for less money, you get more performance, and you pay less for it. It always just sort of goes in one direction of this type of compute just being commoditized. So that's kind of what I see. Right now, they've got this huge mode. It's become this hot thing. There's this huge surge of interest. But over time, I think it's going to be just as much of a commodity as an ARM CPU is today. So, how they really survive in that environment or what the future looks like, um, I'm not sure they're going to be able to sell it at the price of a car forever. There is a point where maybe you have enough compute really, or you say, okay, well, we found ways to use this compute much more efficiently. Now we don't need to scale as quickly, that type of thing. These type of economies like tend to emerge when you have something that you're spending billions of dollars on. People get creative and look at ways to use it more efficiently or ways to not use it or so on and so forth. So I think probably over time I'd rather invest in Tesla's business. They, I think, post autonomy have a car that essentially is 10 times as valuable. It costs them the same to manufacture, but the value they pull in terms of earnings they generate over the car's lifetime is, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 times what it was before or more. And there's no end to it, right? You just get a cut of all the revenue on the fleet. And I think demand there probably scales a lot more sort of smoothly than chip demand, just because you need physical cars out there serving physical demand in the world, and it's a big planet. Whereas, I could see us getting to some point where we don't need, explosive growth in training compute. We have a large amount of training compute already built up and techniques that render it sort of sufficient and not as much of a pressing, urgent shortage situation as it's been recently.
So you guys are, both neutral to bullish on NVIDIA in the next year or two. What would change your minds?
Well, if they came out and said We expect our DGX H100 sales to decline. Then that would be a bad sign.
Yeah, I think NVIDIA has tried to expand, and I think if they were to go into hardware, I would be on the sell side. So, for example, if they were to all of a sudden announce that they want to build a car or build bots, that would be a sign because manufacturing, they don't manufacture their chips. So manufacturing is never their forte. And so you've got Tesla coming towards AI through the advantage of being the best at manufacturing, cars and bots. Whereas you've got NVIDIA coming towards AI from the angle of chip design. And so I think each of them have to be very careful. Like Tesla, going into chip design and manufacturing as an example, got to be very careful with the Dojo program that they're not going out of their circle of competence. Too quickly, right? Because you could spend obviously billions and billions very quickly, probably trillions if you're open AI. So yeah, that would be the warnings.
It's also interesting that NVIDIA invested in other publicly traded companies. On Wednesday, NVIDIA disclosed in a regulatory filing that it has stakes in a handful of public companies: ARM, SoundHound AI, Recursion Pharmaceuticals, NanoX Imaging, and Too Simple. Yoda, does that concern you at all that NVIDIA is, maybe instead of investing more into R&D or CapEx or buying back its own stock, it's, becoming a holding company sort of?
No, I think Tesla has acquired like sort of technology companies that had unique foundational research to offer or to accelerate those research areas. So if NVIDIA is kind of strategically picking off these technology companies, then that's fine. Where the red herring is uh, you know uh, acquiring like a figure.ai or like a complete completely different field that they're going in. But if they're buying foundational research based companies and getting the IP, that's a good thing.
Well, I'm really interested in this company just because I find it fascinating. As Omar mentions, their gross margins are insanely high. And almost every single customer hates that they're reliant on NVIDIA, that everybody's kind of working together to find an alternative to NVIDIA. And yet the stock keeps pushing higher, and the retail investors, really chasing the stock. But we'll see.